The crimson dawn of Proxima Centauri filtered through the massive transparent dome of Sunspire Academy, casting ethereal shadows across the floating crystalline spires that housed the galaxy's most prestigious educational institution. Alex Rodriguez pressed his palm against the cool bioscanner outside the Galactic Culinary Arts building, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The worn leather recipe book, his grandmother's most treasured possession, felt heavier than a neutron star fragment in his trembling hands. 3 months. 3 months since humanity had been grudgingly accepted into the Galactic Culinary Institute, and Alex had become the unwitting representative of his entire species' eating habits. Every meal, every cooking demonstration, every casual mention of human food had been met with the same mixture of horror, disgust, and scientific fascination that one might reserve for studying a particularly virulent disease. The laboratory kitchen buzzed with activity as Alex slipped inside, hoping to avoid attention. No such luck. HFY, a serpentine naga whose iridescent scales shifted from deep purple to warning orange, raised all 4 of his arms in theatrical exasperation. "Ah, the primitive mammal graces us with his presence," HFY hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air with obvious disdain. "We've already begun analyzing optimal nutrient paste distributions for maximum cellular efficiency. Perhaps you prefer to observe from the remedial section." Snickers rippled through the diverse assembly of students. Krila, a delicate Florian whose petal-like skin had turned a mocking shade of yellow, whispered something to her photosynthetic companion that made them both flutter with amusement. Even Thondar, the massive Gorak whose rocky hide contained trace minerals from a dozen conquered worlds, rumbled with what passed for laughter among his kind. Professor Velterra, a towering crystalline whose prismatic body could refract light into impossible colors, turned her attention to the source of disturbance. Her form pulsed with measured authority as she addressed the late arrival. "Ah, Student Rodriguez. I trust you've prepared your contribution to today's exotic cuisine presentation?" Her tone carried the weight of someone who had already witnessed several spectacularly failed human cooking attempts. Alex straightened his shoulders, drawing strength from the memory of his grandmother's weathered hands guiding his own through countless kitchen lessons. Elena Rodriguez had survived the food wars of 2387, had fed a family of 12 on scraps and determination, and had never, not once, backed down from a challenge. "I have, Professor," Alex replied, his voice steadier than he felt. He carefully placed his supplies on the pristine metal counter, each item drawing increasingly horrified stares from his classmates. "I'm making something my grandmother taught me. Something that's been in my family for generations." The laboratory fell silent except for the gentle hum of molecular analyzers and the distant whisper of the Academy's atmospheric processors. Alex could feel dozens of alien eyes focused on him, waiting for another spectacular failure to add to humanity's growing reputation as the galaxy's most barbaric species. "It's called," Alex paused, meeting Professor Velterra's multifaceted gaze, "pizza." The word hung in the recycled air like a curse in an ancient language. Several students exchanged glances that clearly communicated a shared thought: here we go again with human madness. But Alex smiled, remembering his grandmother's words, "Mijo, food is love made visible. Show them what human love tastes like." Today he would do exactly that. "Pizza?" Professor Velterra's crystalline form flickered through a spectrum of colors that Alex had learned to recognize as deep scientific curiosity mixed with profound bewilderment. "And what, pray tell, is this pizza?" Alex took a steadying breath and began unpacking his carefully preserved ingredients from the thermal storage unit. Each item had been smuggled from Earth at considerable expense. His parents had sold their hovercar to afford the interstellar shipping fees. The familiar weight of each container brought back memories of Sunday afternoons in his grandmother's kitchen, the smell of fresh bread and simmering sauce filling their small apartment. "Well," Alex began, holding up a sealed container of flour. "It starts with dough, fermented grain mixed with water, yeast, and salt." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Krila's delicate petal-like skin shifted from its usual pale green to a sickly yellow that resembled dying autumn leaves. "Fermented?" She gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to consume decomposed organic matter? Voluntarily?" "It's not decomposed," Alex protested, but the damage was done. Several students had already begun backing away from his workstation as if he'd announced his intention to prepare radioactive waste. Then, Alex continued, determined to press forward despite the growing horror on his classmates' faces. "I'll add a sauce made from crushed tomatoes, herbs, and garlic." He opened the container of tomato sauce and the rich, earthy aroma immediately filled the sterile air of the laboratory. Sweet nebulas, ZYHAK muttered, his scales shifting to a deep red that indicated extreme distress. You're adding crushed plant matter to your decomposed grain paste. How utterly barbaric. Alex felt his cheeks burning but refused to be deterred. His grandmother had faced worse reactions when she'd first opened her restaurant in the Martian colonies. And finally, he announced, opening the container that held his prize ingredient, cheese, which is fermented animal milk, along with various toppings. The silence that followed was so complete that Alex could hear the hum of the Academy's fusion reactors 3 levels below. Even Professor Velterra's usual prismatic glow seemed to dim to a barely perceptible shimmer. Thondar, whose rocky hide had weathered asteroid storms and plasma bombardments, looked genuinely shaken. You ferment the milk of other creatures? And then consume it. Not just consume it, Alex said, warming to his subject despite the horrified faces surrounding him. We melt it. The cheese gets all gooey and stretchy and creates these amazing strings when you bite into it. Enough. Professor Velterra's voice rang through the laboratory like struck crystal, causing several sensitive species to cover their auditory organs. I think we've heard quite enough description. Please proceed with your demonstration. As Alex began measuring flour into a mixing bowl, he could hear whispered conversations behind him. The universal translator caught fragments that made his heart sink, revolting human practices. How do they survive eating poison? No wonder they're so aggressive if this is their sustenance. But Alex remembered his grandmother's words, Mijo, they fear what they don't understand. Show them the magic. He rolled up his sleeves and began to work, determined to prove that human cuisine was more than mere survival. It was art, culture, and love combined into something transcendent. The dough came together under Alex's practiced hands like a living thing awakening from slumber. Years of Sunday mornings spent at his grandmother's elbow had taught him the precise rhythm: push, fold, turn, repeat. The simple, methodical motion brought him peace even as 23 pairs of alien eyes watched his every movement with the intensity of xenobiologists studying a newly discovered parasite. Elena Rodriguez had learned this technique from her own grandmother, who had learned it from hers, stretching back through generations of family tradition that had survived wars, famines, and the great diaspora to the colonies. To Alex, this wasn't just cooking, it was ancestry made tangible, history kneaded into every fold. Observe, Alex said, his voice gaining confidence as the familiar routine calmed his nerves, how the gluten proteins form long chains that create elasticity. He began to stretch the dough, working it with gentle persistence until it formed a smooth, pliable ball. It's moving, Krila whispered, her photosynthetic skin now a deep purple that indicated severe distress. Her delicate fronds trembled as she watched the dough respond to Alex's touch. How is it alive without a neural matrix? It's not alive, Alex explained patiently, beginning to flatten the dough with his palms. It's a chemical reaction. The yeast, microscopic organisms, consume the sugars in the flour and produce carbon dioxide, creating bubbles that make the dough rise. Microscopic organisms? Ziwadic's scales turned a violent orange, and his forearms began making protective gestures. You're cultivating bacterial colonies in your food preparation? That's exactly the point, Alex replied, beginning to stretch the dough in a wide circle. The gluten strands elongated beautifully, creating a translucent membrane that caught the laboratory's artificial lighting. The yeast transforms the base ingredients into something completely new. Then, with a confidence born of countless practice sessions, Alex tossed the dough high into the air. The circular mass spun gracefully, stretching under its own weight before landing perfectly in his waiting hands. The simple action sent several students scrambling backward, their chairs scraping against the polished floor. Fascinating, Professor Velterra murmured, her scientific curiosity overriding her obvious discomfort. She drifted closer, her crystalline form pulsing with analytical light. The structural integrity appears remarkably consistent despite the absence of molecular stabilizers. How do you achieve such flexibility without polymer degradation? Practice, Alex grinned, spinning the dough on his finger like an ancient Earth basketball player. And the right balance of ingredients. Too much water and it tears like wet paper. Too little and it's tough as recycled hull plating. As he shaped the pizza base on his preparation surface, Alex began ladling the tomato sauce with practiced strokes. The rich red color seemed to mesmerize his audience. Most galactic species had never seen food that wasn't perfectly uniform in color and texture. The pigmentation appears to be naturally occurring, Professor Velterra observed, her form flickering with academic interest. Most civilized species eliminated such irregularities millennia ago. Irregularities make it beautiful, Alex replied, spreading the sauce in gentle spirals. Each tomato is different. Each batch of sauce is unique. That's what makes it art. The concept of food as art seemed to short-circuit several translation matrices. Alex smiled, remembering his grandmother's words, Mijo, they think efficiency is perfection. Show them that imperfection is what makes us human. The Sunspire Academy's culinary laboratory resembled a cathedral of gastronomic technology. Towering molecular assemblers hummed with quantum precision, their chrome surfaces reflecting the ethereal glow of plasma synthesizers. Holographic displays showed nutrient calculations accurate to the molecular level, while automated dispensers could create any combination of elements the galaxy's most advanced civilizations deemed nutritionally optimal. Alex walked past all of it without a second glance. In the far corner, almost hidden behind a bio-waste recycler, sat a simple thermal cooking unit, what his grandmother would have called an oven. It was a relic from the Academy's early days, kept more for historical curiosity than practical use. Most species had evolved past the need for such primitive heat application millennia ago. You're not going to use the molecular gastronomy equipment? Professor Velterra asked, her crystalline form pulsing with genuine confusion. The quantum flavor enhancers alone could optimize your nutritional compound ratios by 300%. Nope, Alex replied, carefully sliding the pizza into the preheated chamber. The metal rack scraped against the oven walls, a sound that made several students flinch. Some things are better done the old-fashioned way. But why? Kreela's photosynthetic fronts trembled with incomprehension. Your species has access to the same technology we do. Why choose inefficiency? Alex closed the oven door and set the timer, an actual mechanical device that ticked with audible persistence. Because my grandmother didn't have quantum enhancers. Neither did her grandmother or her grandmother's grandmother. This recipe has been passed down through generations of women who had nothing but heat, time, and love. As the pizza baked, something magical began to happen. The sterile, recycled air of the laboratory began to change. The cheese started to bubble and brown, the crust turned golden, and the herbs in the sauce released their aromatic oils into the atmosphere. It was a scent unlike anything the alien students had ever experienced, warm, complex, and utterly foreign. Thondar's rocky hide shifted color, trace minerals within his skin reacting to the unfamiliar chemical compounds. What is this? Atmospheric disturbance, he rumbled, his voice carrying a note of confusion that hadn't been there before. Smell, Alex said, breathing deeply of the familiar aroma. It's how humans detect airborne chemical compounds. We use it to determine if food is safe to eat, how it's progressing, and... He paused, searching for words to explain something so fundamental to his existence. How it makes us feel. Feel? Zythak's serpentine form coiled tighter, his scales shifting through a spectrum of confused colors. You base nutritional decisions on emotional responses? Among other things, Alex admitted, watching the timer count down. The smell? It means home to me. It means Sunday afternoons with my family. It means celebration and comfort and... He trailed off, realizing how alien this concept must sound to species who had optimized emotion out of their feeding processes. Your species bases survival functions on inefficient sensory inputs, Professor Velterra observed, but her tone had lost its earlier dismissiveness. Yet you've survived and thrived. How is this possible? Alex smiled, remembering his grandmother's words about the secret ingredient in every recipe. Because sometimes, Professor, the most important nutrition isn't for the body, it's for the soul. The timer chimed and Alex pulled the pizza from the oven, the cheese perfectly melted and bubbling, the crust golden brown. To him, it was perfect. To his classmates, it looked like controlled chaos made edible. The laboratory fell into a silence so profound that Alex could hear the distant hum of the Academy's gravitational stabilizers keeping them anchored to the asteroid base. Steam rose from the golden-crusted pizza in gentle spirals, carrying with it the complex bouquet of melted cheese, caramelized tomatoes, and herbs that had been Alex's childhood comfort. Now comes the real test, Alex announced, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. He picked up the molecular cutter, a precision instrument designed for dissecting food at the atomic level, then set it aside and reached for a simple metal blade. Who's brave enough to try actual human cuisine? The silence stretched like the event horizon of a black hole. 23 alien students and one professor stood frozen, their various forms of sensory organs focused on the steaming disk before them. Some trembled with what might have been anticipation. Others displayed the telltale signs of fight-or-flight responses their species hadn't experienced in millennia. Finally, Professor Velterra stepped forward, her crystalline form pulsing with the steady rhythm of determined scientific inquiry. Her prismatic body had shifted to a deep amber hue that Alex had learned indicated scholarly resolve. As an educator and xenobiologist, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of academic duty, I must experience all forms of galactic cuisine, regardless of personal reservations. Even this. She extended one of her crystalline appendages toward the pizza slice Alex had cut. The triangular piece seemed to glow under the laboratory's lights, cheese still bubbling along the edges. The moment her appendage made contact, her entire body flickered with surprise, a rapid cycling through colors that Alex had never seen before. The thermal distribution is chaotic, she observed, her form stabilizing into a confused blue-green pattern. Some areas register significantly higher temperatures than others. This seems intentional. That's part of the experience, Alex explained, watching as she began the slow process of molecular absorption that served as feeding for her species. The contrast between temperatures and textures, hot cheese against cooler crust, the way different flavors hit your senses at different times. It's what makes eating interesting. Professor Velterra's form shifted again, this time cycling through patterns Alex had never witnessed in any crystalline. For long moments, she stood perfectly still, her internal matrix processing not just the molecular structure of the food, but something far more complex. This is unprecedented, she finally whispered, her voice carrying a note of wonder that made every student in the laboratory lean forward. The fermentation process has created protein chains of extraordinary complexity. The bacterial cultures have transformed the base materials into something entirely new. Different how? Thondar asked, his massive frame trembling with curiosity that overcame his earlier revulsion. The nutritional value is adequate, Professor Velterra admitted, her form now glowing with what Alex recognized as excitement. But that's almost irrelevant. The presence of these flavor compounds, they serve no biological function whatsoever, yet they create cascading sensory experiences. The alien students gasped in unison. In their perfectly optimized civilizations, inefficiency was the ultimate sin. These compounds, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, create neural responses that appear to trigger memory centers, emotional processing regions, and social bonding pathways simultaneously. The fermented animal protein produces what humans call umami, a taste category we never evolved. The processed plant matter contributes acidic notes that enhance other flavors. The thermal processing has created entirely new molecular structures through something called the Maillard reaction. Is that dangerous? Krila asked nervously, her petals now cycling through rainbow patterns of confusion. Professor Velterra's form flickered one final time before settling into a warm golden glow. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of profound revelation. No, she said slowly. It's beautiful. News of the pizza incident spread through Sunspire Academy's crystalline corridors like plasma fire through a damaged hull. Within hours, the Academy's quantum communication networks were buzzing with fragmentary reports that defied all established xenobiological understanding. Students from the furthest reaches of the galaxy, beings who had never shown interest in anything beyond perfectly calibrated nutrient absorption, were queuing up outside the Culinary Arts building with an urgency typically reserved for imminent stellar collapse. Alex found himself at the epicenter of an unprecedented phenomenon. The same hallways where he'd once walked alone, enduring whispered comments about primitive human feeding rituals, now thrummed with excited chatter in dozens of languages. Species that had maintained diplomatic distance for millennia were suddenly sharing space, united by curiosity about this strange human practice called cooking. I still don't comprehend the appeal, ZHK insisted, though he'd been observed lingering near the kitchen ventilation systems for the past 4 hours. His serpentine form coiled in what Alex had learned was the Naga equivalent of nervous anticipation. It remains nutritionally inefficient and serves no logical evolutionary purpose. That's exactly the point, Alex replied, pulling another pizza from the ancient thermal unit. The golden crust crackled with heat, cheese still bubbling in perfect imperfection. Not everything has to be about efficiency or evolution. Sometimes we do things simply because they bring us joy. Joy! HFY's scales shifted to a perplexed silver blue, a color Alex had never seen on any Naga before. You derive emotional satisfaction from the consumption process itself? For humans, they're inseparable, Alex explained, beginning to cut the fresh pizza with practiced movements. We don't just eat to fuel our bodies. We connect food with our most precious memories, with family gatherings, with celebrations of life's important moments. The concept seemed to overload several translation matrices simultaneously. Krila's photosynthetic processes flickered erratically as her neural pathways struggled to process the idea of linking sustenance with emotion. Even Thondar's usually impermeable rocky exterior showed hairline fractures of confusion. You're suggesting, Professor Velterra said slowly, her crystalline form pulsing with analytical light, that human cuisine serves a social function that transcends mere biological necessity? Absolutely, Alex nodded, his confidence growing with each explanation. We cook for people we care about. We gather around meals to strengthen bonds. We mark life's passages, births, marriages, achievements, even grief, with special foods that carry meaning beyond their molecular structure. Your species bonds through shared consumption rituals? Thondar's massive frame leaned forward, his curiosity overcoming millennia of logical conditioning. More than that, Alex said, beginning to distribute slices to the growing crowd of volunteers. Food is how we show love in human culture. When my grandmother made this pizza, she wasn't just feeding my body, she was feeding my soul with her care, her traditions, her hopes for my future. To demonstrate his point, Alex began offering slices to anyone brave enough to try. To his amazement, tentacles, appendages, and various sensory organs reached forward. The fear had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic academic history, genuine curiosity about inefficiency. This pizza recipe, Alex continued, watching as beings from a dozen worlds cautiously approached his offering, represents 7 generations of my family's love. Each woman who made it added her own touch, her own story. It's not just food. It's living history. As word spread beyond the academy, Alex realized he'd done more than introduce aliens to human cuisine. He'd given them their first glimpse into the human heart. 6 months later, the Sunspire Academy cafeteria had transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to the sterile efficiency experts who had designed it. Where once stood pristine nutrient dispensers humming with algorithmic precision, now flourished a vibrant marketplace of culinary experimentation that buzzed with the excited chatter of discovery. Crystalline students had abandoned their traditional energy absorption chambers in favor of specially designed thermal plates, experimenting with temperature variations that created new harmonic frequencies in their prismatic bodies. The previously uniform blue-white glow of their feeding had evolved into spectacular light shows of amber, rose, and gold as they explored the concept of flavor resonance. In the corner where photosynthetic species once absorbed standardized light spectrums, Krila and her botanical classmates had constructed elaborate gardens where they cultivated mineral combinations that created unprecedented sensory experiences. Their delicate fronds now shimmered with hues that had no names in galactic standard, colors that spoke of joy rather than mere sustenance. Even the logical Naga had succumbed to the revolution. HFY's latest creation, a precisely calibrated chemical soup that somehow managed to trigger nostalgic responses in his neural pathways, had become the talk of the academy. His scales now shifted through patterns that resembled what humans might call satisfaction, a concept his species had never before acknowledged. Alex stood at the center of this transformation, no longer the strange human with barbaric eating habits, but the unlikely architect of a cultural renaissance. His grandmother's pizza had become more than legendary. It had become a symbol of everything that made consciousness worth experiencing. I must confess something to you, Mr. Rodriguez, Professor Velterra said, approaching with what appeared to be a crystalline interpretation of lasagna, her form glowing with warm golden light. When you first arrived, I believed human cuisine represented the pinnacle of evolutionary inefficiency. And now, Alex asked, watching with wonder as she absorbed the layered creation, her body cycling through patterns that suggested deep contentment. Now I understand that efficiency without purpose is merely existence, she replied, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there months ago. Your species has taught us that the journey of consumption can be as meaningful as its destination. You've demonstrated that sustenance and culture are not opposing forces, but complementary expressions of consciousness itself. Around them, the cafeteria thrummed with unprecedented activity. Students from dozens of star systems shared meals that would have horrified their ancestors, traded recipes that challenged fundamental assumptions about nutrition, and discovered that the simple act of eating together created bonds that transcended the vast differences in their biology. The Galactic Council has requested a formal report, Professor Velterra mentioned, her crystalline form flickering with what Alex had learned to recognize as amusement. They want to understand how human cuisine has achieved a 98% improvement in interspecies cooperation ratings across 17 academy campuses. Alex laughed, the sound mixing with the symphony of conversations around them. What are you going to tell them? That some transformations cannot be quantified in reports or reduced to statistical analyses, she replied. That humans have reminded us that consciousness is not merely about survival but about finding meaning in the experience of being alive. Your grandmother's pizza didn't just feed hungry students, it fed hungry souls. As the evening meal period began, Alex watched students from across the known galaxy gather around tables, sharing not just nutrients but stories, laughter, and the simple joy of connection. His recipe had traveled further than any human explorer, conquering hearts rather than territories. In the background, the gentle clatter of utensils and the warm buzz of conversation created a symphony that no amount of efficient nutrition could ever replicate. Human cuisine had done the impossible, it had taught the galaxy how to be human. And perhaps Alex thought that was the most important lesson of all.